Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Mastering Retention Podcast. I'm Tom Hammond, your host, co-founder of UserWise. I've been told that I should do that more often. I always forget. I just get so excited about the awesome guests that I have, and I dive right in. But anyways, today I am joined by Valentin Simion, who comes to us with a whole host of exciting insights. Most recently at SOFTGAMES. But yeah, I mean, you've done lots of things, including starting your own company for a while. So, oh man, this will be fun. Today, we're going to actually get to talk a little bit about more like web and instant kind of games, which traditionally we have a lot of like mobile folks on. So I have so many questions. It's going to be fun. But before we do that, Valentin, I always like to ask, what's your story? Like, how'd you get into games? Like, working your dream job, as you will.
Well, first of all, hi, Tom. Thanks a lot for having me here. I've been watching your content for a while and I really enjoyed it. And thanks again for this opportunity of having me here. I mean, it's great having this discussion with you. And I do have some interesting stories to share about my experience, my past experience in a gaming company. But first, let me answer your question. How did I get this here? How did I get in the gaming industry? Well, first of all, let me start when I was in high school and I was enjoying a lot of games. Like I remember playing with all of my friends, Heroes of Might and Magic and Age of Empires 2 in a network and everything. And one of the games that really drew my attention back then was a game made by the Swedish, I think, a Swedish company, which was called Hattrick. And basically there was just this simple website where you basically were able to have your own football team, soccer team, and then you manage that team. And week by week, you had these games that you're playing against other managers. And this one basically captivated me. For me, it kind of opened an entire new universe where you could easily play everything anywhere by simply accessing the browser. So that was the start of me getting interested in the gaming industry. Now, in the same time, I was doing some developing. I was trying to become a good developer, programmer. And I started actually in the web business, websites business industry. And for like 5 years, I worked for a company that was doing exactly this, like web services. And after 5 years spent at that agency, I decided, okay, let me try one time this experience of being an entrepreneur. And I started my own company. And all of a sudden, the entire world like unraveled on me. Like, okay, there were things that I never knew about that existed in this entire environment, business environment of having clients, working with them, making contracts, trying to understand what they need. And really quickly, actually, I failed, which it was a really good experience, actually, because I learned so much from it. So after 1 year and a half of trying this, I basically took like a blank sheet of paper and I started doing all the things, writing all the things that I went wrong. And I started to think about, okay, how can I do this? How can I make it not happening again? How can I learn from all these things?
Yeah.
And back then I started reading a lot of IT or gaming industry books. And one of them actually caught my attention. It was a book by, I think, Eric, I don't remember exactly the name. It was called Lean Startup.
Yep.
Rice.
That was like my startup defining book that like got me into my journey. I love it.
Yeah. So that was incredible. And in the same time, in the Romanian market, there was this company that started getting a lot of attention in mass media. It was called Mavenhat, and they were doing things that no one else did. So I reached out to them. I asked them, hey, would you like to collaborate? And they were really open about it. And the first day at their office was quite incredible. And when I'm saying the first day, I'm referring to the interview day when I actually reached out to them. And what they did, basically, the CTO of the company came to me. He took a pen and a paper, and he said, hey, let's play an exercise. Let's imagine that we have this situation. What would you do about it? There was nothing planned. There was nothing there that was pre-prepared. It was just me, my mind against his mind, and a blank white of paper. So 2 hours later, we forgot that we were in an interview, and the discussion went so far and so pleasant and so enjoyable that basically they made me an offer and I joined them. What I learned there was incredible because it was not exactly about the tools as I was expecting. It was more about the mindset of the people. And getting into the gaming industry for me was like a breaking change. From the person who was looking for the clients and the client's need, I became a person who was looking for the players' needs, for their experience. And all of a sudden, all of the gut feelings that I used to put in my own business needed validation. It was not a moment when I said, okay, I know exactly what I need to do. It was complete opposite. I don't know anything about it. What should I do about it? How to get from this stage of not knowing anything to a stage where I do understand something and I'm able to make some decisions. And that entire experience basically changed my life and made me love the game industry. Short forward, from a developer, I embraced the role of a Scrum Master. Then I also got like a technical producer role, and finally a full producing role for some title of the company. And I think that was all.
That's great. Okay, so tell me a little bit about kind of instant and web games. Like, what's the typical audience like? Like, are they vastly different than your typical like PC console players or your, mobile players? Like, who actually still plays what? I mean, like, when I think of web games, I think of like some flash games that I would play in the computer lab after I like finished my typing exercises when I was like, 10 or something. So who plays web games today?
That's an awesome question, because the answer can be today something and tomorrow can be completely different. Now, all the entire experience I had in gaming basically was in the Facebook environment. So all the games that I worked for were meant to be launched and released and running live ops on the Facebook platform. The company that I worked for, the Maven Hut company, was creating games on Facebook Canvas. So I don't know if you remember, like the times when Zynga basically spammed everyone with notification when you played your little farm and all of your friends and everything. Basically, that was the moment when also Maven Hut started. And one thing that made them successful was that they identified a trend in the demographic of people who started playing the game. So getting back to your question, at that time, it was incredible to see how many women, US women over 45, 55 years were starting to play on Facebook. It was like the entire platform was changing the demographic. And the entire company basically built up on this trend. They started targeting those users, they started creating games for those demographic. And nowadays I'm looking at the same platform, at the same demographic, and it didn't change that much, but we are also looking at some new trends. We're talking about NFTs trends, we're talking about casino games or hyper casual games. On Facebook, it's more like hyper social games than hyper casual. So it's also like we are competing with new game trends, with new genres that are being more and more consumed by this audience. So I would say that the audience didn't change that much, but opportunities are still there and it's still big. Yeah.
Is it now all Facebook Messenger type games, or do people still use like the regular old Facebook games? Like I remember playing those in college, and smartphones weren't a thing when I was in college, we'd all be in our lecture hall and have our computers up. Professor thought we were taking notes, but we were actually playing a bunch of games with each other. Is that old Facebook games platform still a thing, or is it pretty much all on the Messenger now with like the instant games?
No, actually the game platform has changed. The Facebook game platform has changed a lot in the past 5 or 6 years. So they used to have this entire desktop audience where they played only on desktop. So everyone who had a Facebook account, they just opened their PC, opened the browser, logged in on the Facebook account, and then played there. But in the past 5 years, they kind of made a migration into the mobile side. So with the launch of instant games, they made this gaming platform available also for mobile users. You don't need to have a PC anymore. You just open your mobile phone, you just open the Facebook app or the Messenger app, and then you find for the game, you find the game that you're looking for, and you simply play it. And being this entire environment being in a social platform, you also get like some new abilities, some new re-engagement opportunities with all of the users, because you already have tools there. You already have the means of sending a message to someone or sending a gift or inviting them to join you into a level or something. So I would say that it changed a lot. And let's not forget that Facebook is actually a company that is really lean inclined. They're always testing things. They're always launching new stuff. And it's not like an industry that is static. It's always changing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe here's a question. Like, let's say me and you want to start a company today, gaming company. Like, could it be viable for us to say build a 10 or $100 million a year business building Facebook games, or is the audience just too small to be able to support something like that?
I think a better answer we have looking at the market. So in the past 1 or 2 years, we've seen some big companies raising some big scores in terms of investing funds. For example, we saw Playco raising $1 billion, if I remember correctly, last year. We also see VR like getting their own framework there and starting to get on different platforms, not only on Facebook. We're looking at Samsung. We're looking at China market, where we have those more like Asia-oriented apps, messenger apps. They're also working on this, on creating their own instant games environments. So it's not like you're targeting just Facebook. You are targeting an entire new industry. This instant games industry has a potential of, I don't know, reaching 2 billion users or so, 2 billion players. You just need to unlock it, and you just need to do it with the right tools.
Yeah.
Probably if we start together a company, it will take 1 or 2 years just to understand how to build things on all of these platforms in a way that is consistent enough and consistent, so that we don't need to create custom experience for every single platform, but more like consolidating around one single experience that is viable for all of the platforms.
Yeah. So, if I build in Unity and I do like the export to their, I think it's like the Unity WebGL or whatnot, like, will that just work and run in Facebook and Instant Messenger and all those places? Or is there stuff I have to do on top of that basic Unity export to like get a game to work?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, because I remember back in the days we had like each platform environment had their own SDK and their own preferred environment tool, like Unity or HTML5 or whatever it was that. And it was a hassle to actually learn all of those things and have different teams. And I don't know, like the entire work was tremendous. But nowadays you have these really nice tools that you can basically use to go in any platform you want. So let's go with Unity. Yes, Unity have their own, let's call it site project, where they can create really small builds with whatever game you want to have there, and then push it to any instant game platform. But that doesn't mean that those platforms don't have their own particularities. And those particularities actually are reachable through their own APIs. So imagine on Facebook, you have this possibility of sending a message to re-engage the user through a game bot. But on Samsung, for example, which they are also experimenting with instant games, they don't have that yet, but they are working on app to user notification, push notification. So every single environment basically develop their own tools, but you as a company who wants to reach all of them, you do have now the possibilities nowadays to actually identify one single tool that will help you reach those expectations.
Yeah, gotcha. Makes sense. Okay, cool. I assume that if I'm building games for a platform like this, like, would a single player, say like match 3, which I would say historically probably caters to a large, like if you're looking at a female audience or whatnot, probably historically it would cater to them. Like, would that game be able to do good on a platform like Facebook, or is it really about like the social element? So like if you wanted to do a match 3 game, it would have to be more of like the PvP competitive match 3 where you're like playing against each other.
I remember like 4 or 5 years ago, I was still a developer, and I was discussing with my producer, the producer that was in charge of my team, about the game that we were working. We were working on I think it was a football manager game on Facebook platform. And one thing that we noticed is that the other games of the company were growing, and they were growing virally, they were growing organically, but they were also pushed by marketing, but our game didn't work. And I remember asking him, hey, I once hear this, that you just build it and they will come. And he turned back to me and said, that's the biggest lie in the industry. Why are you saying this? Because first of all, you need to go with your product where your audience is. That's the first step. So if you build a game for Facebook and you launch it on PlayStation console, it's not like you built for that audience. You're not going to get an audience there. So whatever you are building with your demographic, your targeted audience already in mind. That's one. And second, even if you put it on the platform, you have competitors. You have so many other companies trying to put their product in the first line in the front of the users, which means that you are already competing with those. So you need to find ways of pushing your product in front of your players. Even on a social platform like Facebook, things are not that easy. So you start with doing some small marketing, some Facebook pages, trying to re-engage just one or two users that you just get organically in the beginning, see where this comes. You start to do some marketing just for doing some technical test of a technical launch, see where that goes, see where the numbers goes. And then finally, when you decide, okay, I do have the metrics, the KPIs that I'm looking for, then finally start to do a bigger push. And at the end, you end up with having a company with 3-4 years experience and 10 titles. And of course, you now can start using those users, those players from those old titles to push the new titles. And you end up basically having these 10 millions of players per day that you hear about in the bigger companies.
That's very cool. Okay, so let's go back to our example. We've decided to start a studio. I guess I'm kind of curious, and maybe you can give me an example here too, but I'm curious, like, what's a good process for a web-based instant type game to go about figuring out like what game to make? Like, everyone that works in games, everyone has, 20, 30, 50 ideas of games that, sound fun and cool, but probably most of them, maybe all of them are, games that shouldn't be made because they're not going to be able to scale. In the world of mobile, hyper casual has come up with a certain formula of, well, we just like make a mock game, 30 seconds of gameplay, get that CPI ad, and understand if it's scalable or whatnot. And there's different varieties of how folks handle it. But what's your ideal process for figuring out, hey, what game should we make at our new studio? And have you ever had any examples where you were sure that this was going to be a great game and it was just a complete flop?
Yes, and that's really interesting because it makes me think about some projects in the past that I really consider them to be like the best of the best, and then realizing later that it was exactly what you said, like a flop, and we should have stopped at some point. But first, let me get back to the moment when I joined the gaming industry. As I remember, I suffered from a complete abrupt mindset change.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I actually suffered a little from the imposter syndrome, which is why I loved the message that you sent me before our meeting. Yes, I do admit I did suffer a lot from it because from my side, first of all, I was coming from a totally different industry where it was more client oriented. And now all of a sudden, I'm not looking at that. I don't have a client. I don't have anyone telling me what they need. And of course, I embraced what was back then like a trend. Just go with fake it until you make it. But it was way out of my comfort zone. I didn't like this entire idea. So I had to reach out to different strategies to learn how to apply some different strategies in order to validate my ideas and to learn what is a good thing to go to and what is something that anyway will fail. And of course, doing A/B tests, small rollouts, trying things, even a simple survey at some point in the early stage of a product can already give you some data. One of the early tests that Maven had in the beginning for the validation of the idea of the concept was just a simple form with free questions, free answers, and a button which says play the game. And the game was not there. But what they did was tracked how many people click on play the game just to see what would be the interest out of all the people who actually went to the form. So these kind of things basically made me be a more data-driven decision maker and basically not rely so much on gut feelings. I think the most important thing is that whatever tools you are going to use to validate your decision, try to do it as fast as possible. Because if you are anyway going to fail at some point, at least fail quick and try to learn as fast as possible. And there is absolutely no failure in learning something. So there was something that I actually learned today, a saying here in Germany, that people who fail a lot, try a lot. People who don't fail usually don't do anything. So try to fail as many times as you can, and this way you're going to learn as much as you can, and then later you're going to be able to take better decisions. If you ask me about a game that basically was a complete flop, it was also a mistake that we did. It was not exactly the game's blame, but we actually were not prepared with the servers. So I remember it was the same Football Manager game that I mentioned earlier. We worked on it for 6 months. We focused on retention. We focused on monetization. We focused on every single small aspect of the game, but we didn't focus on server scale up. And what happened is that all of a sudden we got a nice, huge promotion, and a bunch of 1-2 million users basically entered the game for the first time in less than 24 hours. And
wow.
yeah, it was a really nice and long weekend. I remember back then I was completely scared about the entire situation. It was the first time ever this happened to me. And the CTO came to me, you know, that's not an issue. That's actually not a problem. That's we just solved the problem because we had this issue. If this wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have known that we need to scale up the servers. And the entire mindset was completely off. Like you would have expect a manager to come to you and say, what did you do? You're fired, goodbye. Instead, they said, I'm so happy that this happened. Now we learn, we know how to prepare servers. Next time we're going to do it properly.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I love about this industry.
That's great. You talked a little bit about survey questions before like a game is created. So tell me more about like a survey to get stuff. Like, would you have like a game concept? Would you have some sort of art mock-up? Like, what would be in the survey?
Now, the thing is that if you were to try to replicate a game mechanic that is already out there, probably you can already skip the survey idea because you already have numbers. The internet is so wide, you have so many tools out there that you can just look for them, right? But when it comes to actually trying something new, something that you never noticed before, I think a survey would be a really interesting thing. First of all, you just isolate where you think the audience is going to be. You could come up with some gut feelings, with some gut assumptions that, hey, probably this type of user are going to play this. You can also look at some data on the market about the genre of the game at least, and then try to get some people that are already playing those kind of games into your survey. And focus only on a few questions. Don't try to create a survey that will take you, I don't know, 1 hour to complete because you're going to churn a lot of people. But try to just focus on what is really important for you. Maybe give them a screenshot of the mechanic, ask them if they understand or not. Maybe ask them if they would like to play a PvP version of a game that is originally played only in single player. See what the reaction is. And finally, just try to understand how many of them are actually going to convert in being players. Because that's basically the basis. A lot of people are going to say, that's a cool idea, I would like to see it. But out of those, even 10%, if you are able to get in the game later, that would still be good.
Yeah. So I find that survey questions can be very difficult to do well. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to word questions in a way that lead the audience towards a certain answer, and it can lead to very biased results and stuff. So I'm curious, like, what kind of survey questions would you ask? And like, do you have any examples of like an actual survey question of like, here's how I would ask it versus maybe a different way that you would ask it that might be more leading? So maybe if I can come up with an example, let's pretend I've got a screenshot of a game and a poorly worded question. Maybe I'm trying to like innovate on, let's say like the narrative of this game or something. And so I could word the question of like, do you like games that have a rich narrative? Yes or no? Most people are probably going to be inclined to say yes to that. But if I word the question slightly differently of like, which of the following things is the most important to you when it comes to playing a game? Gameplay, narrative, audio, I don't know, whatever else you have listed in there. And then you look for the people that actually choose narrative as their top choice. That probably means that the narrative is, you know, enticing to them.
Mhm. I think a lot of directions are actually biased by the experience, the human experience of each of the people who are going to complete this survey. I think one of the things that I really like doing is more like creating questions with a call to action. So imagine the situation where you have a small question where it says, would you like to play this game with someone else? And then below you have like a no and a yes, like giving the user the option, the player, the option to click on one of them. So trying to give him like a call to action situation will help them make a better decision. Also, if you are able to give them some visual examples, like for example, put them a main menu from one game and ask them to click on one of them, immediately you're going to get a real feeling of what they're actually going to do in the game. So it doesn't necessarily, you don't need to build the entire functionality, but having just some mock-ups, maybe some wireframes that will show the user what you have in mind at least, and let him just do whatever he wants there. It's still a good thing to get some data out of. I think there are some platforms out there, like for example, if I remember correctly, user testing or some others like that, which you basically just ask players to play your game or look at some wire screens or look at the wireframes or look at some um, images and then just pick up their mind, what they think. As soon as you ask them specific questions, as in, do you like red or green, you're immediately going to influence the mind of that person into one direction or another. But if you ask them, what color do you think it would be more suitable, you already open a palette of answers. So the question is, do you want to have a clear answer between A and B, or are you more into an exploratory mood where you actually want to learn something new, even if you were not thinking of?
That's interesting. When you're thinking of, surveys and things like that, it's really nice to have multiple choice questions because you get like cleaner data. But is there ever value in picking, say, like an open-ended question and like, because on the one hand, like the data-driven side, you could have like 1,000 people answer these and have like clean buckets of how they group in there of what they chose and stuff. But what if you just didn't have the actual answer that people wanted to pick, so they picked something else? Imagine trying to sift through like 2,000 open-ended answers to like multiple questions. It would be very difficult to kind of tie that back. So, is there ever a balance of how and when you use open versus closed questions?
I think it depends on each situation separately, because yes, you need to find that balance. It's actually your need to find that balance in order to decide which one of data you're going to use. Being data driven doesn't mean that you need necessarily to rely on a huge amount of data. You could also just be more keen to hear the qualitative feedback. You don't need 1 million of answers, but you could have 5 people who are actually honest about, and they discuss openly about whatever question you had. So I think at the end of the day, you need to kind of combine both of them. You do have some quantitative data, you also have some qualitative data, and then try to get the best out of both and see where is the middle. Because most of the time you're going to notice that after several iterations, you're going to end up with the same answer from both of them. It's just a little harder to reach that moment. You're probably not going to be able to do it from the first survey or from the first try, but try it 3, 4, 5 times. That's also one of the things that I'm also doing. Even if I'm doing like a simple survey, I'm not going to stick with the first version. I'm going to notice that people had some issues with answering to one question, and I'm going to adapt that question to make it easier for them to answer. So try doing this 5, 6, 7 times, and at the end, you're going to end up with a bunch of data from the previous test and from the current one, and you are going to be able to actually make a better decision. Gotcha. I guess it's kind of the same with the split test. When we are creating split tests, one common thing would be not to just simply rely on whatever you did. I think a successful test split is immediately followed by another one. If you already found your answer from the split test, maybe that information was not that important. But trying to go into the rabbit hole, like testing something once, discovering something, opening new opportunities, new possibilities, testing again on top of the winning distribution, and then again and again until finally you get like exactly what you wanted. I think that's one of the beauty of the product lifetime cycle, especially when you're talking about live ops.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good segue. I actually was curious. What does or what should live ops look like within the realm of, web-based instant type games?
Well, I think first of all, what you need in live ops when you're talking about web-based instant games, it's speed. One of the most important things is to react really fast. You have a huge range of demographic from different countries, from different um, traditions, from different cultures, and every single part of your demographic, every single group of the demographic have different values. So you could say that in Mexico, people are going to celebrate 5 Cinco de Mayo. You could say that, okay, in Romania, for example, we're going to celebrate Dracula's Day or whatever. But these things are really regional. They are not something that everyone over the world is going to enjoy. So what you need is basically to be fast, be able to react really fast, prepare these events in time, and be able to schedule based on segmentation. If you are going in the direction of having one big event for everyone that lasts from 1st of April to 7th of April, most likely you're not going to get the best out of an event. So live ops, it's like doing a lot of small things and really good targeted, and you cannot do that unless you are actually able to foresee some situation, to foresee, to know some stuff about your demographic and to apply really fast. And of course, there are companies out there who have dedicated live ops teams, but this is something usually that it's hard to find in the startups. And instant games, again, it's an industry that just started 5 years ago. So we cannot talk right now about companies that are doing instant games on a level, I don't know, of Microsoft or whatever. So everyone is in a startup right now, and whoever is the fastest has the biggest gains.
Yeah. Do, players in web games have a similar expectation around, new content and special events and things like they're starting to in mobile games? Like every week on Friday, we release new levels. Every Saturday there's a special competition event or whatever you've kind of outlined.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think the expectations are aligned on the same path, on the same direction. Sometimes it's even harder to fill those expectations because doing instant games, for example, on social platforms, the players are always going to be prone to have their focus moved to something else. You are playing on your mobile and you get a notification for your mom or from your girlfriend, and then you switch immediately from the game outside. And what you need is to be able to re-engage that person again into the game to come back. And this time you are doing it with different events, with different setups, with different call to action. Sometimes even more demanding to fulfill these expectations. But when it comes to daily releases, to having always an event live running, having always something that is custom made for that player, I believe that the expectations are at least the same as on other gaming genres or gaming industries.
Yeah. Okay. Have you ever done a live ops event that just totally tanked, or like the players revolted and you thought it was going to be awesome?
So I remember it was one year when there was a Super Bowl. I don't remember exactly the team that were in the Super Bowl, but we created an event, and in that event, we put the players to choose whatever team they would believe that they will win a Super Bowl. And what happened is that 70% of the people, of the players of that game, decided that one specific team should have won, and in reality, the other one won. And this kind of created a lot of love-hate situation where everyone was kind of against the game. They were laughing about the fact that not their team, not their favorite team won, but the other. And I think we simply had to push extra effort into community management. But what we noticed is that for both situations, those who voted for their own team that won and those who voted for a team who didn't won, for both of these groups, the engagement increased. So it's also a win-win situation. Even if a lot of them didn't like the outcome of the event, the level of engagement increased. It feels like players, when they are putting more feeling into the game, they also are being engaged more with the game itself. So it was a really nice learning for us because we started building events that are more close to our players. We started at that moment learning what are the main interests of our players. Can we do something for them that doesn't necessarily has to do with a game? So for example, you have a solitaire game that you are playing. Why not putting an event there with seasons, with spring, autumn, winter? It doesn't have to do with nothing. It doesn't have nothing to do with the solitaire game, but it does just add some sort of a nice event. Or what about all these Valentine's Day events, Easter events? Just look for some eggs. Just flip your cards and see what egg you have there. Again, really nice events that are really resonating with the audience, with your demographic. Just need to do some little research beforehand.
Yeah. Do you or have you ever like utilized like a Facebook group to kind of drive the community to let them kind of drive what sort of events or things they want to have or do?
Yeah, it's interesting that although we tried to do that in the past, at some point we see players coagulating in groups that are out of our control. So even if we have like an official group page where we put some tournaments, we put some leaderboards, we put some nice events, updates and everything else, those are the main groups or pages that are basically used by players for re-engaging with the game and for keeping up to date with all the things that we are doing. But on the other side, we see groups getting created by them in their control, discussing about the game in whatever way they want. And the players that are doing this are actually at least 25, 50% more engaged with than the rest of them. So having people starting to communicate between them, having players discussing about the game between them, and not necessarily being moderated is like a really good indication of the quality of the game and the quality of the content that the game has. It basically makes the players talk about the game.
Do you ever think there's a case for like user-generated content or like I've heard in the past of a popular bingo game where they never really did this, but like the players almost like created their own rules around like the different rooms and who could join and the things and the timing, and they kind of like developed out their own system of live ops. Like every Friday, this room would be going on with this and something else over. And it's like nothing that the game developer did, but the community like loved it. Like, have you ever had an experience where your community's done something like that as well?
So I've seen a lot of communities starting their own contests, like their own ideas of, hey, if you can beat me, I can give you this. Or if you can beat me, I will share with everyone else that you beat me or something. So it's really interesting because on one side, you have the studio trying to keep things in control, trying to make things in their own way. And on the other side, you have communities which basically have their own mind, their own collective mind. And sometimes those situations are even more interesting than what the studio can create by itself. And I do remember seeing leagues created around the Football Manager game that I was mentioning. I remember they had their own leagues, they had their own method of running the game, things that we didn't even consider. At some point, they were simply looking at how many points they can do week by themselves without necessarily being in a league. And on top of that, they created like a monthly contest. Let's see who is able to reach out the biggest score in a game in the next 2 weeks. The winner is going to get from me, whatever. And yes, I did see this in the past a lot of times. And one thing that I noticed is that there are not so many. So if you would say that you want to make this the number of users relative to the number of players, you would say that probably less than 5% are going to start doing that usually in a hyper casual game, especially on a social platform where they already have this tool to use it. But it's rarely that I'm looking at other platforms like Reddit or any other platform similar, where they are basically, I can see that they are trying to make their own gamification or whatever game. I believe everyone has the potential of gamifying their life. And part of their life is actually playing games. So why not gamifying something that's already there in a way that makes you more satisfied? And at the end of the day, I think we can all learn from that because There are so many ideas there, and those ideas don't necessarily mean to, need to come from people who are in the industry or who are professional gamers or whatever. Nice ideas can be found everywhere.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. I'm curious to talk a little bit about designing games for social elements. So I've noticed that a lot of the games that you've kind of worked on, maybe not as much at SOFTGAMES, although there is Best Classic Solitaire, but especially at Maven Hut, there was a whole slew of Solitaire games. How do you make Solitaire like a social type game, or can it be? Should it be?
It's ironic that the simple name Solitaire implies the idea that you are playing alone, right?
Exactly.
And then again, you are putting it on a Facebook platform, on a social platform, and you immediately create this idea of multiplayer. Well, actually, it's rather really interesting because you can have some sort of a real-time PvP experience, and you'll immediately see the difference between having single player experience and PvP in terms of retention. When you let the users, the players, play against each other and they start to create connection between them, they are going to be more easily engaged in the future to come back to the game and repeat that experience. When it comes to single player, I think most important is to have like a more like a secure frame, a stable gameplay, maybe a really good content or really good live ops strategy. But when it comes to PvP, I think there is nothing that can replace that type of retention, the one where you really want to play with your friends. And yes, I do have a long list of Solitaire games played there. And I remember one of the things that we like to brag about was that we create Solitaire games with a twist. Every single game of that list of Solitaire games had something different. It was either a knockout, it was either a PvP, real-time PvP with someone that you could challenge, like a real friend of yours, or it was a simple tournament game. Every single one made use of this PvP experience, and all of them had actually really good retention because of that.
That's very fascinating. Are there other games that are sort of like Solitaire that might make sense with a similar social twist to it?
I think it is possible to move mostly all of the games that we have. We probably don't figure out how many games we can move there, but I see any kind of game being moved into a PvP situation. If you are, let's say, open-minded enough to find that thing that can make it PvP, even if you're not able to set up some real-life PvP experiences, you can still have that turn-based strategy. Or if you remember back in the days, we had this races games where we have like a shadow. So basically I'm running a race, and then when my friend is running the race, he's also see my shadow behind him or in front of him. So PvP, I believe it can be made out of everything. You just need a little imagination and I don't know, some courage to try it.
Gotcha. And here's a question maybe. There was a company that was acquired. It was either by Embracer or the other one that, you know, they're buying everyone all the time. And they were mostly based in the kind of Arabic countries, and their entire app, like all it was a whole bunch of different games that were kind of designed for playing together. And mostly it was like card games. So, you know, like in the US where I'm at, you know, popular card games would be like Hearts or I don't know, I'm drawing Spades. There's a whole slew of like games that you play, you know, usually it's like four people together. And so their entire app was basically like you play these games that you grew up playing with, like live with other players at the same time, not just bots and stuff. You know, would that kind of a thing work well as a social element? Like historically, my experience with like Facebook games would be like Words with Friends, where it's an asynchronous world. Whereas like if I'm playing Hearts, even if I want to play against someone, like we both kind of need to be at the table playing until the game is at least done, right? So would those kind of games work well?
I believe there is no exact formula of making a game working in that situation. I think most of the time the companies probably are not able to put a game on, I don't know, in top 10 when it comes to PvP or social experience, but not because of the game itself, but more like because they were not able to grow the game in terms of finding the demographic fit, finding the way of re-engaging the user, the players in a certain way. I do believe that it kind of almost all of the games can grow if you put enough resources and time into it. And that's actually one of the biggest issues in the gaming industry. You don't necessarily have, actually you never have unlimited resources. You need to get to a point as fast as possible and then be able to grow it even further. But if you already consume all your resources, let's say in 6 months, I think that's the moment when you basically need to pivot, and you are going to, everyone is going to pivot in a different direction. My guess is that if you, let's say one of the games that didn't work, let's take one and put 10 years in it and I know, a team of 1,000 people, do you think it's going to be successful? I do have this feeling that it's going to reach success at some point. It's not going to be
level,
profitable. Yeah, it's not going to be profitable, but it's going to be a success, right?
Yeah.
It also depends on how you define success. If you define the success in terms of revenue and return of investment, not all of the games are going to reach that, that's for sure. Actually, even 2% of them, if they're able to reach that point, I think it's already a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So in the last little bit of time, I want to talk about an important topic, which is profitability or monetization. So how should you monetize, web-based or instant type games? Like, are in-app purchases a thing? Is it all rewarded videos? Is it all interstitials, mix of the three? Tell me about monetization.
That's a tough question because there is no right answer. Most of the time, what I'm seeing is a combination of both of them. So I'm not talking about titles, games that are only on ads or only on in-app purchase. I think the correct answer is somewhere in the middle. How much from each of them is something that we need to test out. But there are people who are not going to spend not even 1 single cent, which is completely natural. We already have the tools out there that we can use. So payments online, it's something that everyone can do these days. So that's not a blocker anymore as it used to be, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago. But on the other hand, you don't have that many conversions. If in a normal free-to-play game, if you get 2% out of your total players being payers, that's still a good thing. But nowadays, you even see less than that. And the way to deal with that is basically getting into a different business model, monetization model, and that is with ads. So you kind of try to combine both of them and see where you put more focus on. Sometimes you get with a game that gets monetized 70% with ads, 30% with in-app purchases. Sometimes you see more on in-app purchase side and I don't know, 10, 15% in ads. Also depends on the economy that you are building. I think one of the things that I learned in the past was that if you start a game, thinking about monetization, how to do that needs to be one of the first steps, because this will define your entire strategy when it comes to gameplay, to game economy, sinks, inflation and everything else. Imagine that you have these games where you have a power-up and you get the power-up if you watch a rewarded ad. How many power-ups a user, a player can put into the game in one single session? How many sessions per day? And at the end of the day, how many power-ups are getting consumed and how much revenue do you make from ads, from those ads? And on the opposite end, you have a player who prefers to spend $5 and get those 5 power-ups right away. Depends also on the country, depends on the ads inventory, depends on the ECPM a lot. Like the ECPM actually has a real big thing. Yeah. But that's another interesting thing that you need to consider, because monetizing on ads, usually you are not in complete control. You still depends on inventory, you still depends on provider, and you're not going to always be able to provide a return of investment. But when it comes to in-app purchases, which is, by the way, my preferred model, you are more in control, because you know what is your conversion rate. You can work on improving that. You know your prices. You can work on segmentation, on trying to make the prices more affordable or the product more valuable for the players. So it gives you more control and more testing opportunities. And at the end of the day, also predictability. And you are able to forecast what will happen. Hey, we have Christmas in 1 month. How many special offers should we prepare? And how many events should we push so that we can, I don't know, increase the return of investment 50% on top of what we are usually getting?
Well, this is amazing. Well, Valentin, I could probably keep going for another hour, but I know we're pretty much at time here. So I do have one final question for you because we are in the Mastering Retention podcast. And that is, what's one tip or trick or lesson you've learned over the years to keep your players playing for longer?
I think one of the most important things that I can give as an advice for everyone out there building games first, and then for the players, is to focus and really focus on one single thing. Don't try to focus on multiple things or in the same time, because doing so, you're not going to be able to improve all of them at the same time. I remember that there was a moment when we tried to increase the retention of one of our games. And for one sprint, which for us was 2 weeks, we basically pushed for different mechanics, starting second-day retention, seventh-day retention, 30 days retention. And we basically created small functionalities for each of them. And at the end of the sprint, we realized we didn't move the needle that much. So we basically gathered around the table and we thought, okay, what would be a good strategy? And we realized that we should try to focus only on one day. Let's work only with day one. Let's focus completely on day one. Build everything that we can think of just for day one. We did that for one sprint. And guess what? Of course, day 7, day 30 reached higher levels just because we fixed that day 1 retention.
Yep.
And then, of course, we could move into the next sprint to focus on day 3 retention to see what else we can do that. I believe, again, that PvP can increase a lot of retention, and not necessarily PvP, more like the social experience where you know that you're not the only one playing the game. Then again, this is not something that it's easy to build because you do need some sort of servers behind, some sort of preparations. So even if you can at least give the idea to the player that it can be a multiplayer experience if you invite your friend and you can at least see your friend's leaderboard, your friend's score on your leaderboard, this will anyway a little increase the retention. So try to be focused as much as possible on one thing. Don't try to improve all of them in one single phase, and also give a chance to PvP.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. I hope to maybe have you back on the show sometime. This has been great.
Thank you, Tom. It's been great as well. Hope to see you again.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.